Dear students of our Bhaktivedanta University, we have another wonderful session today. Our guest and speaker today is Devamrit Maharaj. He doesn't require any introduction because everyone in the Russian-speaking area knows Devamrit Maharaj for his brilliant lectures, for his knowledge of the Shastras, and for his enlivening discourses. So his topic today is very relevant and difficult one, I would say. He will speak about the mission of Srila Prabhupada and how Srila Prabhupada combined the internal and external reasons of Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu's appearance, and how both reasons are manifested by Srila Prabhupada for us, and what are the ramifications for us in this regard. Without saying much more, I'm happy to give the microphone or whatever, Zoom, to Devamrit Maharaj, and we all ears to listen to him. He is speaking to us from New Zealand. It's already late evening in New Zealand. But he kindly agreed to give this lecture despite the inconveniences of late evening lecture for him. So we are very thankful for his kindness and his eagerness to participate in our program for Bhaktivedanta University. So thank you very much, Devamrit Maharaj. Please, you can start your lecture.
First, let me say that I'm so thrilled by what you all are doing with this Bhaktivedanta University. When I heard about it from His Holiness Bhaktivedanta Maharaj, I was so moved because such a effort is so desperately needed. And I'm so happy for your part of the world that you have such a facility. First of all, let me point out, I'm happy that you have persons who can attend such a facility. And then secondly, I'm happy you have the facility for enlivening and enriching such persons, such fortunate persons. I'm sure, I know Srila Prabhupada is so pleased by this program, and it's something the entire world of ISKCON can be proud of, and hopefully we can emulate. Om Gyana Chimarandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshun Militang Yena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha. Jai Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasati Gaur Bhaktivedanta. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. I've been given a difficult topic, as Maharaj says, and although difficult, it's necessary. How we can see Srila Prabhupada and his ISKCON as the full package of Lord Chaitanya's mission and mercy. I'll speak a lot from Shastra, especially Chaitanya Charitamrita. I'll speak some from Srila Prabhupada's letters, and I'll explain before doing so why some of the letters I cite, paraphrasing them, you would not have seen in the folio. And I'll also speak about the history of the Sanskrit department in the Los Angeles BBT during the time when Prabhupada was with us and so many books were published. I'll speak about Prabhupada's handling of devotees who couldn't see that he was presenting the fullness of Lord Chaitanya's mission, the internal and the external. And I'll try to present to you how Prabhupada walked the talk and talked the walk all in one package. He demonstrated the life of a Shuddha Brajavasi, a pure and eternal resident of Vrindavan. He demonstrated that through the way he interacted with the material world, with devotees, all while pushing on the mission of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So first, I'd like to begin with a very inspiring purport occurring at the end of the description of the installation of the Gopal deity inaugurated by Madhavendra Puri. And please bear in mind a statement by Srila Prabhupada to those of us at the BBT during his days. He said, actually, anyone can translate, but his purports are his devotional ecstasies. So sometimes the purports are informative with some details, and sometimes you find the deepest realizations which become more and more dear to your heart as you read them again and again. So this is Madhya Lila, chapter 4, text 79. Translation. The wonderful festival and installation of Sri Gopalaji was arranged in one day. Certainly, all this was accomplished by the potency of Gopal. No one but a devotee can understand this. So where does Prabhupada take this in his purport? We're on the edge of our seat always when we encounter such opportunities. He writes, the Krishna consciousness movement has spread all over the world within a very short time, within 5 years. And mundane people are very much astonished at this. However, by the grace of Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, we understand that everything is possible by the grace of Krishna. Why does Krishna have to take 5 years? In 5 days, he can spread his name and fame all over the world like wildfire. Those who have faith in and devotion to Krishna can understand that these things happen so wonderfully by the grace of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. We are simply the instruments. In the fierce battle of Kurukshetra, Arjuna was victorious within 18 days, simply because Krishna's grace was on his side. Yatra Yogeshwara Krishno, Yatra Parto Dhanur Dara. Tatra Shir Vijayo Bhutir, Dhruva Nitir Matir Mama. Wherever there is Krishna, the master of all mystics, and wherever there is Arjuna, the supreme archer, there will also certainly be opulence, victory, extraordinary power, and morality. That is my opinion. So now we have a personal directive to us following this explanation of the principle of empowerment. Why 5 years? It could have happened in 5 days. So what does Prabhupada request of us? He says, if the preachers in our Krishna consciousness movement are sincere devotees of Krishna, Krishna will always be with them because he is very kind and favorable to all his devotees. Just as Arjuna and Krishna were victorious in the battle of Kurukshetra, this Krishna conscious movement will surely emerge victorious if we but remain sincere devotees of the Lord and serve the Lord according to the advice of the predecessors, the six Goswamis and other devotees of the Lord. As Narottam Das Thakur has stated, Tandarachana Sevi Bhakta Sanevas, Janame Hoy Abhilash. Krishna conscious devotees must always desire to remain in the society of devotees. Bhakta Sanevas. They cannot go outside the Krishna conscious society or movement. Within the society, we must try to serve the predecessors by preaching Caitanya Mahaprabhu's cult and spreading his name and fame all over the world. If we attempt this seriously within the society, it will be successfully done. There's no question of estimating how this will happen in the mundane sense. But without a doubt, it happens by the grace of Krishna. So there you hear a very personal directive from Prabhupada to us all. If the preachers in our Krishna conscious movement are sincere devotees, if we but remain sincere devotees. So what does it mean to be a sincere devotee? Certainly, we're all thinking about that. I'll try to show during this discussion from words of Srila Prabhupada that a sincere devotee means someone who's always thinking, what is Krishna's pleasure? How can Krishna be most pleased? And in fact, I hope to, by the words of Srila Prabhupada, show that the result of such sincerity is that you're not in the material world. You're not even in Vaikuntha. You're in Vrindavan. In other words, let's see what the peak potential of Srila Prabhupada's mission is, how it bursts open with the full mercy of Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu. And as I said, we'll be giving you some examples from the day-to-day life of ISKCON. First, I can begin by pointing out things that devotees thought were impossible. But Prabhupada said, it will happen if you just endeavor sincerely for Krishna's pleasure. You might consider some of these things to be passé or just, what's the big deal? But everything is subjective. Everything depends on the perceiver. So I remember in 1973 in New York City as a brand new devotee. Prabhupada told us that, I have to explain the context, but first I'll tell you what he said. He said that if we keep on distributing his books and preaching, one day soon, all the phony avatars, Inca and gurus and what have yous that were arriving in New York practically every day at the airport from India. He said, very soon they'll all be gone. This was not easy to believe because practically the whole temple, 125 devotees, was out on Sankirtan every day or Harinam. And several times a day, you'd run into someone telling you, my guru is God, or my guru is Rama, my guru is Krishna. Come see him. Come with me. Stop wasting your time doing what you're doing. Such charlatans, such phonies would fill huge stadiums of 50,000 persons. This was the scene in 1973 in New York. Unbelievable, huh? So when Prabhupada said that, just go on with your sincere activities. Very soon they'll all go away. You had to really, you needed to invest some shraddha. And indeed, by 1974, the inundation of avatars and so-called gurus from India dried up completely. Instead of one arriving every day at the international airport in New York, none were coming anymore. So that sounds like not a big thing to you, but for us back then it was. I've had experience of other situations in which Prabhupada said, go on endeavoring, go on acting on behalf of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and such will happen. He told this about the old Iron Curtain, those days. He said, if my books are distributed, that'll be the end of such a regime. I couldn't see how it would be so. I was located in the Eastern Europe part of that old regime. And in pursuance of Prabhupada's instruction, just to show you how we're trying to be sincere. Here you have a Yale University graduate, like at the pinnacle of Western education. And what was I doing? Book smuggling. Organizing book smuggling. So we took Prabhupada's words deep into our heart. And although who could foretell what would happen? But things happen. I'll give you another example later about the inconceivable Caitanya Charitamrita marathon, still talked about by devotees to this very day. So let's hear some more Shastra. This is a section from Madhya Lila, chapter 16. And I'll just go through it, various sections, various parts. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has been conferring with Nityananda in a solitary place, and no one knows what they're talking about. And then Advaita Acharya talks to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And again, no one knows what's going on. Advaita Acharya is gesturing and talking, and Lord Chaitanya smiles, and then Advaita Acharya is so happy. And this is right before the devotees from Navadvip returned from Jagannath Puri. So next, Mahaprabhu starts talking to Nityananda. Shripad, holy man, I have a request to make of you. Please fulfill this desire. Don't come to Jagannath Puri every year. Please stay in Bengal. Fulfill my desire. What was that desire? Mahaprabhu wanted to see everyone in Bengal surrendered at Krishna's lotus feet. So as Prabhupada writes in the beginning of the purport of text 64, and this will keep us on track as to what the mission is. We don't want what's called in the corporate world mission drift. He writes, the mission of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is to spread the only medicine effective in this fallen age of Kali, the chanting of the Hare Krishna Mahamantra. So Mahaprabhu wasn't in Bengal. He's now located by his mother's request in Puri. So he wanted to find someone who could actually execute such an important responsibility. And so he chose Nityananda, just as he entrusted Rupa and Sanatan Goswami Goswamis with their work of codifying the Shastras, Nana Shastra Vicharana Kanipano, Sadharma Samstapako. So Nityananda was instructed, don't come to Puri every year. By the way, he did anyway. Because he's Nityananda. He's contradictory. You may remember that on one such trip, excursion from Navadvip to Puri, in which Nityananda wasn't supposed to be there, he came anyway, and it was on that trip that he kicked Shivananda Sain. But Shivananda Sain wasn't bewildered. He knew, I have received the greatest favor that even Lord Brahma can't get. I have been touched by the lotus feet of Nityananda Prabhu and the dust from those feet. My whole life is successful. Nityananda, observing the attitude of Shivananda Sain, was so happy and embraced Shivananda Sain. But anyway, our point is that he's not supposed to be coming to Puri. He's supposed to be preaching in Bengal, because Mahaprabhu says, I need someone who can do this. So Prabhupada writes that the main thing is the desire of Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu, even more than our personal desire to remain to not go to Puri. We may, if we have time, get to Gadadhar Pandits telling Mahaprabhu, you don't actually need to go to Vrindavan. And then Prabhupada will cite a long list of the most elevated personalities who never went to Vrindavan during Gaur Leela. So, looking at the purport, Prabhupada writes, it is a greater fortune to carry out Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's order than to satisfy one's senses by seeing Lord Jagannath. Preaching Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's cult throughout the world is more important than staying in Vrindavan or Jagannath Puri for one's own personal satisfaction. Spreading Krishna consciousness is Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's mission. Therefore, his sincere devotees must carry out his desire. Pritiviche ache yata nagaradigram sarvata pachar hoibe moranam. The devotees of Lord Chaitanya must preach Krishna consciousness in every village and town in the world. That will satisfy the Lord. Sometimes devotees would ask Prabhupada, really? I mean, not just the cities, but every village and town? And Prabhupada would answer, why every village and town? Every door. In other words, this is serious. Here in New Zealand, which has towns that are just 2,000 persons, a couple of big cities like Auckland, 1.5 million, and Wellington and Christchurch, 500 million. I mean, 500,000, sorry. When a temple was erected in Auckland, and devotees proudly informed Prabhupada, even though Prabhupada had told the first devotee who came to New Zealand, don't build a temple in the city, get a farm and start Varnashram Dharma. Of course, we're still trying to figure out what is Varnashram Dharma. It's a very interesting instruction. And Prabhupada elaborated that New Zealand is a first-class agricultural country. But anyway, devotees took things another way. And so they proudly told Prabhupada they had a temple in the main city. And Prabhupada's response was, why just one temple in the main city? Why not every town, every village? devotees were astonished. Like, you know what that means? They didn't say that, but do you know what that means? Prabhupada, in New Zealand, the town means 2,000 persons. But Prabhupada emphasized every town, every village. And sometimes he would say, every door. Nityananda and Haridas would go door to door. So we continue. That will satisfy the Lord. It is not that one should act whimsically for his own personal satisfaction. This order comes down to the parampara system, and the spiritual master presents these orders to the disciple so that he can spread the message of Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu. It is the duty of every disciple to carry out the order of the bona fide spiritual master and spread Lord Chaitanya's message all over the world. So here we have the standard for the bona fide spiritual master and the standard for the genuine disciple. The bona fide spiritual master takes the order coming down through parampara and presents that order to the disciple. And that order is to spread the message of Mahaprabhu. And so then it's the duty of the disciple to carry out that order, because the order is bona fide. So in this way, we see the principle of empowerment. So Mahaprabhu elaborates to Nityananda. You can perform a task that even I can't do. Except for you, I don't see anyone in Gauda Desh who can fulfill my mission there. So what does this mean? You can do a task even I can't do. Mahaprabhu is emphasizing the power of parampara. And this is what Prabhupada emphasized so much, that it's not that he would say, it's not that he's done any magic. It's just that he's carrying out the order of the parampara. So we might say, well, is the parampara really such a big deal? I mean, isn't it like mainly the individual? And isn't it, well, Prabhupada Shaktivesh avatar empowered with that Shakti? Yes, but you have to take him as he presented himself in terms of what we should emphasize. He said, I'm simply the servant of the parampara. I don't change anything. I'm acting as a humble servant of my spiritual master, executing the order of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Somehow or other, as we progress in bhakti, we need to more and more come to grips with this spiritual technology, this spiritual device of the parampara. In fact, some of you may remember how one devotee was fascinated by so-called Vedic technology, vimanas, flying aircraft, and all kinds of mystic powers described in Mahabharata. And so the devotee was just waiting for Prabhupada to come to Dallas so he could ask Prabhupada about it. So he got his chance. He said, Prabhupada, can you tell us about Vedic technology? And then the devotee sat back waiting to hear about all kinds of mystical and esoteric devices and abilities. But Prabhupada just looked at him and said, Vedic technology means parampara. The devotee was astounded. He never thought of the parampara in that way. It's applied spiritual technology. It's the way that empowerment comes to us. It's our bona fide credentials. So Mahaprabhu is telling Nityananda, you can do something I can't do. So Prabhupada, I'll summarize it, the purport, explains that Mahaprabhu certainly delivered many conditioned souls himself, but his disciples mainly came from the upper crust of society. Even though Rupa and Sanatan were considered fallen by the Brahmana community. They're actually quite posh. They're actually quite, extraordinarily competent, have posts like prime minister. So then there's Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, the greatest scholar of his day. And what to speak of Prakashananda Saraswati, the erudite leader of thousands of Mayavadi sannyasis. So Lord Caitanya, Prabhupada explains, focused mainly on that kind of caliber. But Nityananda, he went after Jagai and Madai. And so, as you know, and I was listening to the Srila Prabhupada Sandarbha session given by His Grace Burijan Prabhu, where he described so wonderfully the Jagai and Madai pastime. You know, Mahaprabhu was so angry, he was about to kill both of them. But Nityananda Prabhu was more kind than kindness itself. He saved Jagai and Madai from death, but he also elevated them to the transcendental platform. So Prabhupada writes in his purport, thus, what was not possible for Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was carried out by Nityananda Prabhu. And then he advocates the potency of the parampara. He writes, similarly, if one is true to Gaur-Nitai's service in the disciplic succession, he can even excel Nityananda Prabhu's service. This is the process of disciplic succession. Nityananda Prabhu delivered Jagai and Madai, but a servant of Nityananda Prabhu, by his grace, can deliver many thousands of Jagais and Madais. That is the special benediction of the disciplic succession. Moving ahead a bit. By the grace of Vishnu, a Vaishnav can render better service than Vishnu. That is the special prerogative of a Vaishnav. The Lord actually wants to see his servants work more gloriously than himself. So he gives the example of Arjuna in the battle of Kurukshetra. He gives the example of Hanuman, who jumped over the ocean with one leap, whereas Lord Ramachandra made a bridge of stones. He did make the stones float, but still, it seems Hanuman was more glorious because of just jumping over in one leap. So this is a mystery of bhakti, the principle of empowerment. And how does Prabhupada end the purport? Again, with a directive to us all. If we simply follow Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's instructions and follow in the footsteps of Sri Nityananda Prabhu, this Krishna conscious movement can advance, and even more difficult tasks can be performed by the preachers remaining faithfully to the service of the Lord. What shall we turn to next? How about let's recall the inconceivable Caitanya Charitamrita Marathon. By Prabhupada's mercy, I became part of it. What happened in 1975, I had become sick and I could no longer do book distribution. My cherished goal was one day to be like Vaisheshika Prabhu and all the other star book distributors. And I was finally making progress toward my goal. I told myself, if I just do this service every day of the rest of my life, I'll go back to Godhead for sure. I had it all figured out. So the body didn't agree. And finally, the body gave out. And so I reluctantly told devotees I would agree to change my service. And I wound up with the BBT, just as it was departing New York to go to Los Angeles, because Prabhupada was starting to let it be known he was dissatisfied with the speed of book production. So I'll read you an excerpt from Prabhupada's arrival in Los Angeles in June of 75. He spoke briefly and said, "I have no personal qualification, but I simply try to satisfy my guru. That's all. My Guru Maharaj asked me that if you get some money, you print books." So there was a private meeting, talking. Some of my important godbrothers also were there. It was in Radhakund. So Guru Maharaj was speaking to me that since we've got this Bagh Bazaar marble temple, Calcutta, there's been so much dissension and everyone thinking who will occupy this room or that room. I wish therefore to sell this temple and the marble and print some books. So I took this up from his mouth that he was very fond of books. And he told me personally, if you get some money, print books. Therefore, I am stressing on this point. Where is book? Where is book? So you kindly help me. That is my request. Print as many books as possible in as many languages as possible and distribute throughout the whole world. Then the Krishna consciousness movement will automatically increase. That's the arrival talk. And then what happens the next morning? The thunder and lightning is starting. Prabhupada mentions on his morning walk these 17 volumes that are unpublished. That's according to the way they divided the books. That meant 15 volumes of Caitanya Charitamrita and 2 volumes of 5th Canto. These 17 volumes unpublished are a great problem for our movement. So the devotees in charge of publishing at that time responded, "Yes, Prabhupada, yes, yes, something must be done." And Prabhupada replied, "They must be published immediately." "Yes, Prabhupada, yes." The devotees had their own conceptions of what immediately meant. And it turns out to be quite different from Prabhupada's expectations. And so Prabhupada now starts to reveal something inconceivable. He says, "So I think the 17 books can be printed in 2 months." The devotees were thinking, did I hear correctly? Or am I hallucinating or what? The press or the BBT publishing offices had just opened up. Things weren't even in order yet. So the devotees in charge decided, once we explained to Prabhupada the practicalities and our plan for increase 4-fold, not doubling it, not tripling it, but quadrupling it. Once we explain that, oh, he'll be satisfied. So they told him, we've been meeting and we've come up with a plan. We can go from 1 book every 4 months to 1 book every month, quadrupling it. Prabhupada looked at them and said, 1 book every month? And calculated, that means 17 months for 17 volumes? No. You have to do all the books in 2 months' time. Let me tell you, let me try to explain to you how mind-blowing this is. To anyone with ordinary managemental intelligence who isn't on the pure spiritual platform, this makes no sense at all. I'll say it right out. Materially, it made no sense. It's one of those things that when I explain this to devotees in general, I point out that if your Guru Maharaj these days told you such an instruction, you would probably, your spiritual life would be in trouble. Or you could say, I think I should find a Siksha Guru. But we couldn't do that to Prabhupada because he was the everything. But I'm saying that to you just so you understand how inconceivable it was. It was mind-blowing. How do you go from one book every 4 months to 17 volumes in 2 months? So Prabhupada repeated it, and the managers were stunned. And of course, you know about the statement, impossible is a word in a fool's dictionary. So there was no way out of this. And the two book production managers on the morning walk kind of dropped back and conversed among themselves. And then they rejoined the group with Prabhupada that was walking. And well, everyone was in their 20s back then. And there was a lot of rivalry and competition, what people today might say, the male ego. So you could just imagine what happened when they re-entered the group that was walking with Prabhupada. All the devotees were looking at them like, come on, Prabhu, surrender. Come on. Even though these devotees had no idea how they themselves could execute such a mission, but we're young men in our 20s, feisty. Come on, Prabhus, don't doubt, surrender. Hopefully, we've all matured quite a bit since those days. So that night, the managers convened and came up with a plan to do the impossible, even though it seemed so far-fetched. It's like your spiritual master points to water and tells you, walk, it's dry land. Or he points to dry land and says, it's water, swim. That's what it was like. So you want to know what it's like to be with Prabhupada sometimes. He could be inconceivably demanding. Often I hear that, oh, Prabhupada was so merciful. He was so forgiving. Yes, but there are other aspects. So to make a long story short, once we decided it could be, we had to do it. Not that it could be done, but we had to do it. An energy from the spiritual world descended. And that energy persisted for 2 months and made the impossible possible. To this very day, those devotees who participated in this marathon can't figure out how it was accomplished. It makes no material sense whatsoever. It's wonderful for every devotee to have such an experience, somehow or other. Doing some devotional service in the temple or on Sankirtan, deity worship, outreach, public relations. Have that experience of something inconceivable that you never think would happen, and it happened. So this is how the whole campaign ended. Indeed, 17 volumes were done in two months. And Prabhupada had insisted, at my Vyasa Puja ceremony, I'll be in Vrindavan, Krishna Balaram Mandir. I want the last book in my hand then. So a devotee was at the printer and got the advance copy straight off the press and jumped on the plane and flew to Delhi and took a taxi to Krishna Balaram Mandir in Vrindavan, and walked in the courtyard just as Prabhupada was getting off the Vyasasan because the ceremony had concluded. And Prabhupada was walking to his room in the back, and the devotee enthusiastically was following. Oh, so happy. And so Prabhupada entered his quarters, sat down, and the devotee paid his full dandavats, holding the book out, and then presented the book to Prabhupada. Like, you could, on the devotee's face was a look of triumph. We've done it. We've done it. We've done the impossible. And Prabhupada took the book, looked at the devotee with a straight face and said, "You have promised before the ceremony, and now it is after." Who could predict such a response after such an inconceivable ordeal? And that was Prabhupada's response upon getting the final of the 17 volumes. But that night, he dictated a famous letter, which I have on my wall. He wrote, "By this effort, you will all go back to Godhead." So this mercy is available through parampara. And now that we've been speaking about becoming empowered, let's look at ways we can become disempowered. We need to explain positive and negative. Perhaps we should finish with Nityananda Prabhu responding to Mahaprabhu's commission. He says, "Oh Lord, you are the life and I am the body. There's no difference between the body and life itself, but life is more important than the body. By your inconceivable energy, you can do whatever you like, and whatever you make me do, I do without restriction." So in the purport, Prabhupada writes that everything is possible for a pure devotee because he acts under the instructions of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Through his inconceivable energy, through the Lord's inconceivable energy, a pure devotee can perform tasks that are supposed to be very, very difficult. He can perform tasks not even previously performed by the Lord himself. The Lord wants to give all the credit to his servant, and the servant wants to give all the credit to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So in this way, Nityananda Prabhu departs Puri. Mahaprabhu embraces him, and then Nityananda leaves, supposedly not to return. I'd like, since we're talking about parampara, especially in terms of books, I'd like to turn to Los Angeles in 1975. Actually, no, this is 76. There was a phenomenon known as the Gopi Bhava Club. And these were devotees who decided to focus upon just the Gopi sections of Prabhupada's books. Teachings of Lord Caitanya, Krishna book, Nectar of Devotion, Caitanya Charitamrita. That was out then, so that had been published. And they just calculated with their own intelligence that since Gopi Bhava is the highest, that's all we should be focused on. And what's worse, they were thinking and saying that the ISKCON leaders were misleading because they were engaging devotees in so much book selling and managemental affairs and temple affairs, when actually the devotees should just be relishing the most confidential nectar. And they were even saying things like Bhagavad Gita is too body conscious. It's too external. So this was going on for about 6 months. I remember they would have little gatherings, and and they were quoting nectar verses, and the verses are nectar, no doubt about that. But that's all. If you would respond to their vibrating a so-called nectar verse to you, if you would respond with a verse by Prahlad Maharaj, they would just a lower devotee. They obviously didn't understand the full package of what Prabhupada was presenting us as it descended from Mahaprabhu through the Parampara, how the internal and the external are woven together so ingeniously. So Prabhupada came, and when he heard about it, you can just imagine he was furious. He said, "This will destroy our movement." He took it so seriously. He asked to see the leaders of this club, and they actually came and tried to defend themselves before Srila Prabhupada. They said, "Well, this is in your books, and it's the highest. Shouldn't we go for the highest?" And Prabhupada would respond, "But you are the lowest." And they would even try to imply that Mother Yashoda was some kind of inferior personality because she wasn't in Madhurya Ras. Oh, you can just imagine the nuclear explosion going through Prabhupada at that point. And so he took it as a threat to the whole ISKCON society. And he took personal responsibility in urging the leaders to dismantle this so-called Gopi Bhava Club completely. Most of those devotees involved, 20 or 30, unfortunately never recovered. Almost all of them never recovered. But the problem had only partially manifested. What was also going on was the Sanskrit department, a lesson in how to be disempowered by being over-intelligent. One thing I might add, though, about the Gopi Bhava Club was that they were not reading others' books. They were not reading outside literature of this math or that math, or they were reading Prabhupada's books, and Prabhupada accused them of misreading his books. They would say, "But Caitanya Charitamrita, Ancha Leela, the ecstatic transformations of Mahaprabhu, Gopi Bhava, Radha Bhava." And Prabhupada would say, "Yes, but what about the part of Caitanya Charitamrita where Mahaprabhu says, Guru more mukhateki korilo shasan, I'm a fool, and therefore my guru chastised me. What about that part?" They would bring up about Radha Kund. Isn't it there in Upadeshamrita? And Prabhupada would say, "Yes, but are you acting in the way of Raghunath Das Goswami? First, you adopt his lifestyle, then we can talk about Radha Kund." Which brings us now to the Sanskrit department and how these very competent Sanskritists lost the plot. They began to think that there's something higher than what Prabhupada is giving, that Prabhupada is giving just the ABCs. And so they're grateful for the ABCs, but they began to be curious and investigate what the Babajis were telling them in Vrindavan. So Prabhupada first got a report about two persons. I'm debating whether I should say some of their names. there are three altogether because two of them are prominent professors in the field of Indology. One of the three is no longer in this world, but the knowledge of at least one of them, the name is quite well known. But I want devotees to focus, please, on the principle and not into denigrating anyone personally, even though such persons have denigrated themselves. They haven't been practicing bhakti for 40 years, although they're considered experts in some particular field of Indic studies. So Prabhupada first gets wind of the situation because these are his personal Sanskrit editors. He says, "Dear so-and-so and so-and-so, I've received a report that you're not working on my books. Why have you stopped editing my books? So what are you doing with my books? You have stopped editing, but what is your occupation now?" They had stopped working on Prabhupada's books because they were off exploring Radha Kund, taking instruction there and thinking that by residing there, they were at the pinnacle. So why should they work on such elementary literature? Or if not elementary literature, why shouldn't they be focused on the more esoteric literature, which they would call, quote unquote, Goswami literature? So one of them came back from Radhakund to Los Angeles when Prabhupada was there. And he went to see Prabhupada. And so I was waiting for him because I'm with the BBT also. So I was waiting for him as he came out of Prabhupada's quarters, and he looked like he had been hit by a freight train. I asked him, "So what did Prabhupada tell you?" He said that he was speaking to Prabhupada about Siddha Deha, Siddha Pranali, asking about that, and telling Prabhupada he had just spent a few months at Radhakund. And he said Prabhupada practically spit the words out at him. "So, how did you like Radhakund?" Like you were never there. Materially, you might have thought you were there. Therefore, Prabhupada was spitting the words out. That's the kind of Radhakund that you were at. Radhakund. And so the Sanskritist left his Prabhupada's quarters, and I saw him when he came out. And as I said, he looked like devastation. He lasted 2 months after that, never to be seen again. So he was not number one in the Sanskrit pecking order. He was number two. Number one, I can say his name, the infamous Nitai. So Prabhupada's writing him to Nitai. "I've received information that some of our devotees are mixing with the Babajis in Vrindavan. This has produced so many problems amongst our men and women who visit Vrindavan. Here in Los Angeles, we have found there is a group of about 40 devotees who privately meet to discuss the intimate pastimes, artificially thinking that they can enter into the understanding of the gopis prematurely. This will create havoc in our society, and the result will be that if this is allowed to go on, our preaching work will be greatly hampered. This premature desire to understand the Leela of Krishna is due to mundane sex life desire, as we have seen amongst many of the Babajis and Sahajiyas in Vrindavan. Our blank blank came back from Vrindavan asking me that he had heard some Babaji speaking about Siddha Deha, and he was also listening to these Babajis. So I want this immediately stopped. If it continues, this mixing with the Babajis, then it will mean spoiling. In many cases, these Babajis keep 2 or 3 women. A satsanga chag. Their associations to be avoided and prohibited amongst all our devotees who visit Vrindavan. So that's quite explicit to Nitai, but the message fell on deaf ears because Nitai was already deeply involved in attending lectures outside the Krishna Balaram Mandir. And therefore, Prabhupada commented, why should he do that, going outside for lectures? If he's not satisfied with the standard of lectures in our temple, then he should be permitted to give some lectures himself. But this habit of going outside to hear others should be stopped immediately. And Prabhupada wrote the same thing directly to Nitai. I've received reports that you've been developing the habit of going outside the temple to hear lectures by others outside. And Prabhupada would name some of the prominent personalities of Vrindavan. Strictly, no one should go outside to hear lectures by others. If you're not satisfied by the caliber of the classes at the Krishna Balaram Mandir, then you should give another class. But you cannot go outside for hearing others' lectures. Kindly stop this habit immediately. But the problems went on. And Nitai was telling devotees that if you want to go back to Godhead, you have to chant 64 rounds every day. Otherwise, it'll take many births for you to go back to Godhead. And so quite a few devotees were affected by such an apparently erudite person making such pronouncements. Where did Nitai say he got this information from? He said, from some advanced devotee at Govardhan. So Prabhupada was telling devotees that Nitai has become a Sahajya. He said, you vow to chant 16, but you can always chant more. But as we know, Prabhupada gave his instruction about the package for going back to Godhead. So finally, Prabhupada had to issue an edict to all GBC members. He wrote, please let it be known that Nitai has become a venomous serpent. Be careful of him. So Nitai then sends Prabhupada a letter explaining his reasons for leaving ISKCON. And Prabhupada, just to set the record straight, just to clarify, didn't write back, but in the presence of the devotees around Prabhupada, he went point for point. Nitai had said that Bhaktivedanta Saraswati Thakur's initiation was not bona fide because Gorakishore Das Babaji never initiated anyone. And so Prabhupada gave the history of this particular Babaji who was propagating such during the time of Bhaktivedanta Saraswati Thakur. And Nitai was going on to say he now doubted ISKCON's teachings. They're not according to Shastra. And he gave the example, a quotation from Caitanya Bhagavat, where Lord Caitanya says, one cannot become one of his associates unless one chants X amount of rounds daily. So Prabhupada just gave a practical response that if you take all the so-called Goswamis, Babajis, and Mahatmas in the whole of the Vrindavan area together, they have not advanced Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's movement 1 inch. So more points like that. And finally, Nitai wrote that unless you're chanting X amount of rounds a day, you cannot get Krishna praying. But if you do chant X amount of rounds a day, Krishna will automatically give you Krishna praying. So Prabhupada explained Krishna is not obligated to anyone. He can do what he likes, no matter how many rounds they chant. And then the end. Nitai writes Prabhupada in that same letter that he's going out to seek shelter of a great Mahatma in whom I can place greater faith. And he asked Prabhupada for his blessings so that I may advance more and more. What was Prabhupada's response? Yes, I bless you that you shall never advance. So I'm giving you such an example because there's a danger in not understanding Prabhupada's inconceivable ability to combine both the internal and external reasons for Lord Chaitanya's appearance. External doesn't mean inferior, it means what's readily visible. And internal is what is confidential. So, as I said earlier, Prabhupada was a Shuddha Brajavasi in word, song, and action. He demonstrated complete dependency on Krishna, just like a Brajavasi. He just didn't talk about Rasikas. He demonstrated he has no other shelter than Krishna and whatever Krishna wants for Krishna's pleasure. All the truths of the Sampradaya, Prabhupada demonstrated in action as well as by speaking. One thing I like to point out, it's a little side topic, but when you look at Bhaktivedanta Thakur, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, and Srila Prabhupada, they didn't simply innovate. We hear this word a lot, innovate. Our acharyas always innovated. Sometimes we have to innovate. Do we have the intelligence to innovate correctly? But these acharyas, Bhaktivinoda, Bhaktisiddhanta, and Prabhupada, didn't simply innovate. They simultaneously deepened the tradition. So both things are going on at once. Bhaktivinoda Thakur expanded the village guru concept, which was all that Gaudiya Vaishnavism was known to be before he made his transformation. He expanded the whole Gaudiya Vaishnava phenomenon from being like just a village phenomenon to something that covered all of Bengal, according to his Nam Hatta scheme. And then Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur took that all of Bengal concept and spread it all over India. And then Prabhupada took that expansionist vision and applied it to the whole world. And how did Prabhupada do that? He recognized that the most powerful institution, the most powerful form of institution these days is the multinational corporation. More powerful it is than governments. So Prabhupada shrewdly understood that to fulfill Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's order, he needed the most suitable form of organization. So we're way beyond now just the concept of the village guru. That's what Bhaktivinoda Thakur had to deal with. And then we're way beyond just the concept of Namhattas in Bengal. And we're way beyond just the concept of mandirs and projects covering India. We're dealing with the whole world. While these acharyas are doing this, they're also deepening the tradition. Bhaktivinoda Thakur, as you know, wrote so many wonderful songs. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, so erudite in his ability to mine all the shastras. And then Prabhupada, his ability to take from these previous acharyas address the contemporary context and spread the Bhakti tattva all over the world. Let's see what delight we can turn to next. Ah, I knew there was something I was looking for. How to see Vrindavan everywhere. Prabhupada gave instructions about that. And we may not understand the full potential of such instructions. But if we think about them deeply and try to apply them, we're on the road to becoming a sincere devotee. So we'll approach this whole gift, divine gift of seeing the potential to see Vrindavan everywhere by going to Caitanya Charitamrita, where Gadadhar Pandit is talking to Mahaprabhu. Mahaprabhu has returned to Puri after an apparently failed attempt to go to Vrindavan. And so he tells devotees, Mahaprabhu tells devotees, I had to come back. I couldn't go to Vrindavan because Gadadhar Pandit was not happy. I came back just for him. So what was Gadadhar Pandit's response? Wherever you stay is Vrindavan, as well as the river Yamuna, the river Ganges, and all other places of pilgrimage. Although wherever you stay is Vrindavan, you will still go to Vrindavan just to instruct people. Otherwise, you will do whatever you think best. So the purport is very astounding. Prabhupada explains that it wasn't essential for Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to go to Vrindavan, for wherever he stayed was immediately converted to Vrindavan. And Mahaprabhu's very mind was Vrindavan, Mora Mana Vrindavana. And because his mind was Vrindavan, all the pastimes of Radha and Krishna were taking place within himself. But just to teach the people, he visited Boma Vrindavan, the Vrindavan Dham in this material world. So now, Prabhupada gives you a very deep directive, which may take some time to process. He says in this same purport, although it's very difficult to enter into the Radha Krishna pastimes, most of the devotees of Vrindavan are attracted to the Radha Krishna Leela. So you might say, oh, yeah, sure, fine. However, he writes, since Nitai Gaura Chandra are direct incarnations of Balaram and Krishna, we can be directly in touch with Lord Balaram and Lord Krishna through Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Nityananda Prabhu. Those who are highly elevated in Krishna consciousness can enter into the pastimes of Radha Krishna through the mercy of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. It is said, Sri Krishna Chaitanya, Radha Krishna Nahayanya. Sri Krishna Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is a combination of Radha and Krishna. This brings to mind what Srila Prabhupada said was happening to him before he left Vrindavan to prepare for his journey overseas. He said so many residents of Vrindavan were coming up to him saying, why are you leaving? Why are you leaving Vrindavan? All you have to do is just stay in Vrindavan. But Prabhupada would always tell us, his point that it is the pleasure of his spiritual master and the fulfillment of the order of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is where the real Vrindavan is found, not physically or geographically. So he goes on in the purport to talk about how the eternal Brajavasis, like Srup Damodar, didn't even visit Vrindavan, nor did Sri Ramananda Roy, Sri Shiki Mahiti, Sri Madhavi Devi, and Sri Gadadhar Pandit Goswami. He quotes his Guru Maharaj, Bhaktivedanta Saraswati Thakur, who points out we have no authorized documents stating that these exalted personalities visited Vrindavan. Now, how does this apply to us? He says, presently, the members of the Hare Krishna movement throughout the world live in materially opulent cities, such as London, New York, Los Angeles, Paris, Moscow, Zurich, and Stockholm. However, we are satisfied with following in the footsteps of Srila Bhaktivedanta Thakur and other acharyas. Because we live in the temples of Radha Krishna and continuously hold Harinam Sankirtan, the chanting of Hare Krishna, we consequently live in Vrindavan and nowhere else. This is the peak potential of what Srila Prabhupada is giving. And we don't want to underestimate it or undervalue it. We beg for the mercy that one day we can see this peak potential. He says, we consequently live in Vrindavan and nowhere else. This is not the only time he said this. It may go in one ear and out the other, but we're getting a little insight, not a little insight, a big insight into how the external and the internal are so combined to the extent that we could be living in Vrindavan, in a temple or ashram. Not automatically and mechanically. Everything depends on the degree of absorption in Krishna's pleasure. And we'll hear more about that in a class given in Melbourne, Australia by Prabhupada in 1974. Because we want to be sincere devotees. What does it mean to be a sincere devotee? We've been instructed to be sincere. How do you do that? Do you just walk around all the time like this? And that means, oh, you're sincere. Listen, our problem is how to serve Krishna honestly. This is our problem. The devotees are always anxious. Here, Krishna is the enjoyer and we're enjoyed. So our business is to see, how am I being enjoyed by Krishna? By serving him. This is devotion. This is Krishna consciousness. So long you want to enjoy this material world, you are in the material world. And as soon as you offer yourself to be enjoyed by Krishna as servant, according to his order you serve, then immediately you are in the spiritual world. So you can become in the material world or spiritual world as you desire. As you desire. If you want to remain in the spiritual world, this temple is the spiritual world. We are not living in Melbourne. This temple is not Melbourne. It is Vaikuntha. All the devotees roar, Jai! But then Prabhupada goes on, it is Vrindavan. So if you stick to this temple service, Krishna's service, then you are not in this material world. But as soon as you want to enjoy this material world, immediately you are in the material world. This is your position. Can this be for real? We could be in Vrindavan if we constantly think about Krishna's pleasure, how Krishna can enjoy. So this brings me, I like this. This brings me to a letter that you won't find. Maybe you'll find it. I couldn't find it in the folio or the database. But you see, I, during my LA BBT days, received the service of filing all the letters to Prabhupada and from him, from past and present. And I can personally explain that I was always longing for Prabhupada's personal association. I don't know what you would do if from your Guru Maharaj, all you ever heard was one sound directed personally at you. You might just give up your bhakti and say, what's the use? He's never talked to me. So Prabhupada came one time into my BBT office. I shared an apartment with Jayadvaita Swami, the chief editor. He was a brahmachari then. So first Prabhupada came in my room and I was just staring at his feet, praying for his mercy. And then I lifted my gaze. And I saw Prabhupada looking me over up and down, and he just made a sound. That was it for my lifetime of physical Vapu association. So then he went from my office to Jayadvaita Das Brahmachari's office, and Jayadvaita Das Brahmachari had already put a chadar on the floor for Prabhupada to sit on, and Prabhupada sat on his chadar and pronounced Jayadvaita means parampara. So that's just a side aspect of the story about how I was always longing for more association from Prabhupada, even though here I am working on his books 12 hours a day. But, you know, when you're a young devotee, you just have to find something to feel dissatisfied about. So one day in my BBT office comes Ramaswar Prabhu with a huge box. He's carrying it like this. And he told me, Devamrita, in this box are all of Prabhupada's correspondence, all the letters to him, and all his responses. I want you to keep them safely in your office, but don't read them. I kept a straight face and yes. But now I'll put the blame on Jayadvaita Maharaj. As soon as Ramaswar Prabhu left our facility, Jayadvaita, then Das Brahmachari, comes running into my office. Okay, Devamrita, let's get into it. So we just read letters and read letters and read letters. And oh, I never knew that. Wow. Did you see how Prabhupada explained this? There were so many letters. Finally, Jayadvaita Brahmachari told me, look, I'm just across the hall in my office. Whenever you find something particularly juicy or controversial, let me know and I'll come running in. So we do our BBT work during the day because the most intense phase of the marathon had ended. And then in the evening, we would read letters. So I saw one letter, which if you can find it, all glories, but it was about a controversy in the early 70s in LA at the start of the big book distribution explosion. So devotees were going around saying that the sixth prayer of the Guru Vastak. Nikunja Yuno Ratikerig Siddhai Yayali Bir Yuktir Apekshaniya Tatrati Dakshad Ati Balabhasya Vande Guru Sri Charanarabindam. The spiritual master is very dear because he's expert in assisting the gopis, who at different times make different tasteful arrangements for the perfection of Radha and Krishna's conjugal loving affairs within the groves of Vrindavan. I offer my most humble obeisances unto the lotus feet of such a spiritual master. The Sankirtan devotees were going around saying that this verse, Nikunja Yuno Ratikerig Siddhai, also applied in an extended way to the Sankirtan devotees, because they were all day long making tasteful arrangements for conditioned souls to reconnect with Krishna. So a controversy exploded, as you can imagine. Many devotees were saying, oh, this is fanaticism. This is going too far. I mean, really. We want people to go out on Sankirtan, but, using this verse and saying it somehow or other relates to Sankirtan devotees, way over the top. It's Australian slang, way over the top. So I saw that letter to Prabhupada, and I saw Prabhupada's response. His response, I can't quote it word for word, I can only paraphrase, but basically he said, this is true.
Maharaj, I just sent you this quote. Chat.
Okay, you found it.
Yes, Maharaj, it's a letter to Nandalal, 1974.
Okay. Let's see. The explanation given by Rameshwar that Sankirtan is Lord Chaitanya's Leela, which he compares to the gopis trying to engage others in Krishna's service, is the correct understanding.
Is this the one?
Maybe 74. Maybe, yes. It has the same idea. So here you see the extraordinary unification of Mahaprabhu's chasing after conditioned souls and Gopi Baba, assisting others in meeting with Krishna. I have to regain my place after this brilliant find by Madan Mohan. Yes. Another letter I found interesting, which I mentioned to Giraj Maharaj as he was writing his Juhu book, which I hope all of you who read English have read. It's just, it's so wonderful. The history of the Juhu temple. I hope someone will translate it into Russian. So I told him how I, during my letter filing days, had uncovered a letter in which Prabhupada said how he persisted with the property deal with the infamous Mr. Nair. He said, with my business intelligence, ordinarily, I would have known that the man is a cheater, but Krishna covered me so I would proceed and build the temple at that spot. Very interesting insight into how the pure devotee knows, and how if Krishna doesn't want him to know, he doesn't know. Complete dependency on the Supreme Personality of Godhead. True Vrindavan life. Krishna doesn't want us to know he's God. We don't want to hear about it. Nanda Maharaj would never hear. What do you mean, Supreme Personality of Godhead? He's my son. And the cowherd boys would think, he's done an amazing thing, our friend Krishna. He must be a demigod. Well, boys, you know what that means. If he's a demigod, then so are we, because we're all equal. Another interesting letter, before we're going to head for deep water, or deeper water, I'm just warning you, is another letter I found was one written by a devotee, a former leader who had taken a refresher course in Maya. He had gone off and he had come back. That's very wonderful. And he wrote Prabhupada a letter, because I got to see the letters to Prabhupada and from Prabhupada. So I saw both sides. What an education. He wrote Prabhupada that in order to reestablish myself and recapture Krishna's mercy, I need a service that's a dangerous special mission. Maybe I should be going to a war zone like Vietnam at the time, or something that's really going out on the limb so I can be recognized by Krishna again and make up for my mistakes. I need a special dangerous mission. Prabhupada wrote back, you'll chuckle when hearing this, about the special dangerous mission. I request you to please attend the morning and evening program every day. Okay. So we've talked about how to be sincere and not live in Melbourne or Moscow or Zurich or New York, but how to live in Vrindavan, even beyond Vaikuntha. Now we're going to go to entering into Krishna Leela through serving Lord Caitanya. And I hope that by this knowledge, you'll see the interrelationship between serving Gauranga Mahaprabhu and understanding the highest truths of Radha and Krishna. And in this way, I hope that you'll be able to see how Prabhupada gave it all. That reminds me of a point I almost forgot during Prabhupada's handling of the Gopi Bhava controversy. He, on the topic of misreading his books, he explained that what's in his books are not for everyone. He said his books are like a pharmacy that contain medicines for every type of patient, from the neophyte to the most advanced Mahabhagavat. The full range is there, he said, in his books. So therefore, you can misread his books by just picking out the parts meant for the most advanced devotees and neglecting the parts meant for where a neophyte is at. So very important point to remember. Prabhupada's books are like a grand concert piano with all the keys, you know. I don't know if pianists still use these, or everything is electronic these days. But anyway, you know what a classic full piano looks like. So Prabhupada played all the keys, so to speak, from the bottom to the top. And so his books are like that. And if you don't have the adhikar, you won't see clearly how he's instructing the most advanced devotees. So he explained that during this Gopi Bhava controversy. To give us a deeper appreciation, I'd like to turn to a verse by Prabodhananda Saraswati, who's the uncle of Gopal Bhatta Goswami. He's given us insight into how to approach Radha and Krishna Leela properly, authentically, for real, and not just talking the talk or pretending. It's a famous verse from Caitanya Chandramrita, verse 88. Yata yata godapadara vinde, vindeta bhaktim kritapunya rasi, tata tatot sarpati hridya kasmad, radha padamboja sudambu rasi. I've seen various possible translations. And some are enhanced, but enhanced legitimately, but they're all enlivening. So I'll read them all. Number one, as much as you surrender to the lotus feet of Sri Gauranga, you'll find yourself safely situated in the service of Radha Govinda. Don't try to approach Radha Govinda directly. If you do, there may be some difficulty. But the lotus feet of Sri Gauranga will take you there safely. Second translation. This one I know is from Bhanu Swami. When a person accruing piles of pure acts attains bhakti to the lotus feet of Gauranga, a sweet ocean from the lotus feet of Radha suddenly enters his heart. And this one's an enhanced translation rendered by Shivaram Swami. As much as one devotes his full attention to the lotus feet of Lord Caitanya, to that extent, he will be able to taste the nectarian service of the lotus feet of Shrimati Radharani in Vrindavan. The more one engages in the service of Sri Caitanya, the more one finds oneself in Vrindavan, tasting the nectar of the service of Sri Radha. So this is how you can authentically see the unification between the external preaching activities and the internal activities of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Everything depends on our consciousness. If we know that this is what's going on, a unified experience, we'll never think that Prabhupada didn't give us the highest. I don't know how anyone could think that when you're singing before Bhagavatam class, Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. After Mangalarti, you're having Tulasi Puja, begging to be a maidservant of the cowherd damsels of Vrindavan. What you see depends on your consciousness. It's all there. Prabhupada gave us everything. But we have to patiently wait to make some spiritual advancement. Briefly, I'll turn to Sri Navadip Dham Mahatmya, and you'll get more information there from Bhaktivedanta Thakur. He writes, now with Krishna, there are 5 relationships: Shanta, Dasya, Sakya, Vatsalya, and Madhurya. By first worshiping Gauranga in the mood of Shanta and Dasya, the devotee attains Krishna's service in the other rasas. By first worshiping Gauranga. According to his relationship with the Lord, the devotee's eternally perfect mood spontaneously manifests in the course of his devotional service. Whoever makes a distinction between Gauranga and Krishna is contemptible and will never attain a relationship with Krishna. But in the association of devotees, one who possesses the qualities beginning with humility will first worship Gauranga in Dasya, or servitude relationship. This Dasya Rasa is the highest mood in the worship of Gauranga. It is in that mood that the devotees call Sri Gauranga Mahaprabhu. One who is qualified in Madhurya Rasa worships Gauranga in the form of Radha and Krishna. As Radha and Krishna have combined in one form as my Gauranga Roy, their pastimes do not appear to be manifest in his form. When the worship of Gauranga in Dasaras reaches full maturity in the heart of the living entity, Madhurya Ras naturally develops in his heart. At that time, one's worship of Gaura Hari qualifies him to worship Radha and Krishna in Vrindavan. Gauranga then drowns the devotee in the nectar of Radha and Krishna's eternal pastimes, which the devotee enters as he attains Vrindavan. So, without a doubt, Prabhupada has given us ample opportunity and more to serve Gauranga and realize Radha and Krishna in that way, the legitimate way. The outreach is united with the inreach in the most ecstatic way. Caitanya Charitamrita, in a very deep way, which you may overlook, talks about the internal and external. I'll just read you two short paragraphs from Adi Lila, chapter 4, text 56. In fact, Radharani is the internal potency of Sri Krishna, and she eternally intensifies the pleasure of Sri Krishna. Impersonalists cannot understand this without the help of a Mahabhagavat devotee. The very name Radha suggests that Srimati Radharani is eternally the topmost mistress of the comforts of Sri Krishna. As such, she is the medium transmitting the living entity's service to Sri Krishna. Devotees in Vrindavan, therefore, seek the mercy of Srimati Radharani in order to be recognized as loving servitors of Sri Krishna. Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu personally approaches the fallen conditioned souls of the Iron Age to deliver the highest principle of transcendental relationships with the Lord. The activities of Lord Chaitanya are primarily in the role of the pleasure-giving portion of his internal potency. So if you really want to go high up on the ladder of Sankirtan, at the top you're getting to Srimati Radharani, who is the medium transmitting the living entity's devotional service to Sri Krishna. If we can play a humble, insignificant role in assisting in that, which is what Gauranga wants us to do, Sri Gauranga Mahaprabhu, how successful our life will be. Some more, we'll be more down to earth now. Who will take the opportunity to be empowered? We've talked about how the empowerment is coming through the parampara. Who will take advantage and who won't? Several devotees have told me they heard Prabhupada say this in their presence. One of them was Dhananjaya Prabhu. He said that Prabhupada told him that a hypothetical situation, which we hope will never happen. He said, what if all the temple presidents, all the ISKCON leaders, all the pujaris, all the GBC persons leave Krishna consciousness? What would happen then? Prabhupada went on to explain that because His books are everywhere. Someone can pick up one of his books, read it, and know exactly how to restart the Hare Krishna movement. So that's Prabhupada's fail-safe arrangement. Everything is there in his books, for the most neophyte to the most advanced. And even if all the devotees leave, someone can read one of his books and know exactly how to reignite the Hare Krishna explosion. Here's a letter I wonder if our Madan Mohan can find. I've never found it, but he's capable of pulling rabbits out of hats. So this is a letter I know is for real because I had it taped to my brahmachari locker door in the New York temple. And devotees would come by and read it. A letter that starts out sad because it's written to a leader who had problems. And so I'm paraphrasing. Prabhupada wrote that, I've given you such a big opportunity to be a leader. And now I'm hearing so many things about you. You can imagine how forlorn I'm feeling. But I know that Lord Caitanya will send me the right persons to lead this movement. If not you, then someone else. What will we do with our opportunity? We can be a leader just by doing any service in an exemplary way. But we can disqualify ourselves by envy. And we can be envious of someone who's displaying some degree of empowerment. I like to think of Prabhupada's definition of envy that can help us. He said, envy is indirect appreciation. You only envy someone who has something or does something better. You don't envy someone who does something or has something worse. So he said, since envy is indirect appreciation, why not just directly appreciate? Just like I mentioned at the beginning of our talk, how directly appreciative I am of this Bhaktivedanta University, this educational endeavor. I would hope I'm constructively envious, thinking, oh, the other parts of the world need this. Why don't we have this? Now, if I was negatively envious, here's an example of what I would do. And this is something Prabhupada wrote to Yamuna Devi about various moths. And we don't want to get into, such institutional dealings. That's not the point. The point is his instruction about envy. Okay, please. So he writes, regarding various moths, our position has nothing to do with them. They cannot do anything. And if somebody does something, they'll be envious. That is the nature of third-class men. My Guru Maharaj once told this story. One friend informed another that one man has become a high court judge. Oh, no, he replied. No, that can't be right. Yes, now he's a judge. I've seen him sitting on the judge's bench. But the second man replied, maybe, but I don't think he's getting any salary. So Prabhupada continues, such envious men will find out some fault anywhere. There's no fault, actually, but they will manufacture some fault. That is their business. So many persons were envious of my Guru Maharaj, but he was preaching and did not care for them. So yes, I could manifest my enviousness about the Bhaktivedanta University. It's probably not going to last more than 1 year. Oh, His Holiness Bhaktivedanta Maharaj, he does many things. He'll probably stop doing this after a short time and come up with another brilliant idea. Or it's actually not so big what they're really doing. I mean, they have a few courses, they got a few celebrity speakers on their website, you know how things are. I guess I can give a good demonstration of how to be envious because I know all about it. So my point is how to be disempowered. We're getting near the end here. Unfortunately, I have to quote examples from, I don't want you to trip out on them. I don't want you to get caught up in the names and histories. Let's just take the principle, please. But these are things I know of directly. In 1976, one particular Gaudiya sadhu was telling one of Prabhupada's disciples that your Guru Maharaj is a businessman. He was always a businessman. I have been studying Shastra since childhood, and that's all I've ever done. But he's a business person, and so whatever he's doing now in Mayapur, it's all just business. Other comments from sadhus are, his books are ABCs. When are you devotees going to try to understand the secret nectar of Navadvip? And I remember right at Prabhupada's first disappearance celebration in November of 1977, one Gaudiya sadhu, in giving his eulogy, his glorification, said, Prabhupada did a great thing. He didn't call him Prabhupada. Bhaktivedanta Swami did a great thing going abroad. But I had no taste for associating with so many low-class people. So my point is not to get hung up in the personalities. I don't want you trying to figure out who said this and who said that and what math are they from, and forget it. We're focusing on how to recognize envy. You see, many of Prabhupada's godbrothers, and I've come to understand it more and more. Many of Prabhupada's godbrothers knew him during his grihasta and business days. And so they just couldn't really accept fully that Abhay Charan is the world acharya. It was just too much. We know him. We used to go to him for donations as sannyasis. He's a householder with children and a wife. And now they're calling him Prabhupada. It was, for many of them, it was too much to digest. So what about us? Let's focus on us. How do we acknowledge devotees who are manifesting empowerment when they are our juniors in age and our juniors in time spent in ISKCON? I've seen a lot of problems because of this. Oh, this young one, what does he know? We'll see what he's like in another 10 years. Or let's not give these younger devotees an opportunity to be empowered, give them facility because they're young. Let's just let us seniors just hold on to everything until well, here's what I'm not saying I agree completely, but this is what some children of devotees, children who are now in their 30s and 40s, by the way, say, oh, you old timers are going to hold on to the keys to Prabhupada's mission until you're dead and gone, and we have to yank the keys out of your dead hand. I hope it's not that bad. But we should always be on the lookout how to bring others up. There should always be that vibrant, uplifting experience. So much to do. We need more and more leaders, more and more preachers. And of course, they should be educated. So again, I'm so happy about this Bhaktivedanta University. And I thank you all so much for this opportunity to associate with you all. Maybe as deemed by Madame Mahan, we may have time for a few questions. I don't know.
Thank you so much, Maharaj. Yes, we do have questions. But Bhaktivedanta Maharaj, do you have any concluding words from your side before we get to the questions?
I just want to thank Devamrit Maharaj for this enlightening discourse. And my greatest appreciation for this last section where Devamrit Maharaj was speaking about the need for empowerment and the main impediment on the path of empowerment, which is hidden or not so hidden envy. It's definitely a challenge which we all have to face within ourselves. But if the proper culture of empowerment is being established in our society, it will help us to overcome this impediment. And ultimately, it will serve the purpose of Srila Prabhupada's movement or Srila Prabhupada's purpose in this earth to spread this Krishna consciousness movement. It's a brilliant and very appropriate point, especially appropriate for the leaders. Your last exclamation that let's look out for those people who could be empowered. Let's do the needful to empower them and to give them the keys from Prabhupada's movement. It's definitely the slogan of our educational program here. That's the main point. So you hit the nail on the head. Thank you very much, Maharaj.
Well, I applied my little hammer to the big nail that you've already hammered.
You anyway hit it on the head.
Thank you very much, Bhaktivedanta Maharaj. Rajendra Kumar Prabhu has asked a question. I have just forwarded his question to you, Devamrita Maharaj, but maybe Rajendra Kumar Prabhu would like to ask it personally. He's here and he can. Rajendra Kumar Prabhu would like to ask your question directly.
Okay. Hare Krishna Maharaj, please have my humble obeisances. You mentioned that Bhaktivinoda Thakur took the concept of village guru to the concept of Namahata, then Bhaktisiddhanta to all India, Srila Prabhupada to the whole world. But under the circumstances, when this pandemic puts limits on international preaching, don't we need to go back to this village guru concept again?
I don't have a crystal ball in which to see the global future. But I can say that most likely we will see many gurus focusing on just a village and some or other traveling to a wider area. Prabhupada would always say, when pointing out we need thousands of gurus. He said, if you can just speak in your neighborhood, or maybe just to your family, that's okay. Or if you have facility, you can travel the world. So he always presented the picture as being wide open. So it could be, could be that we're going to see more travel impediments than we'd like to see, but somehow or other, Mahaprabhu's mission will go on. So to summarize, I would say, most likely you'll see a combination of both.
Hare Krishna. Thank you very much.
Thank you. When we're asking devotees to send their questions to chat or raise their hands and ask them directly, but so far I haven't seen any other questions in the chat, or your presentation, Maharaj, has been so preemptive as far as questions and everything has been laid out so clearly and exhaustively. Looks like we don't have any doubts in devotees' minds. But from our experience, devotees listen to such presentations and they discuss them, they ponder over them, and they apply them to their lives. And that's what we expect of them, and that's what we request them to do. So we may expect questions, some questions after devotees have gone through the presentation again. We have one question from Ishana Prabhu, who is a leader. He's temple president in Sochi. And if you don't mind, Maharaj, I will call on him. Ишана Прабhu, пожалуйста, вы можете задать вопрос.
Харе Кришна, Маharaj, примите, пожалуйста, мои поклоны, преданные. Извините, я начал писать, но понял, что это очень долго и решил поднять руку. У меня вопрос следующий. Вот Бхактивиданта Махарадж привел несколько примеров, в которых Шрила Прабхупада давал четкое, конкретное определение ошибкам, которые совершали преданных, и в том числе самим преданным, вот, назвав, например, Нитай Пандита как змея, да, кажется, отравленная змея, то, что он вот делал. И это помогает преданным правильно сориентироваться, где правильно, где неправильно, хорошее, плохое. Тогда как в наше время, ну, по крайней мере, то, что я вижу, очень часто мы почему-то боимся давать вот такие же четкие определения некоторым поступкам, поведению преданных, их качеств. И создается в целом ощущение, что что бы ни делали преданные, все хорошо. Они все искренние, и надо их всех любить. И это сбивает с толку зачастую, особенно молодых, которые дезориентируются и не могут все-таки понять, что хорошо, что и плохо. Я надеюсь, мой вопрос понятен. Почему так происходит в наше время? Мы из-за своей нечистоты боимся давать такие определения четкие. Или какие-то другие причины.
In summary is that as you have given evidence to, Srila Prabhupada had no qualms in calling out different deviations and problems that devotees had. He would very straightforwardly point them out so devotees could be alerted, like you quoted the example, his letter about Nitai, when Prabhupada called him a venomous snake. But these days, sometimes we see the devotees in leadership positions are very reserved in you could say calling a spade and saying that certain things are wrong and they shouldn't be done, it shouldn't be propagated, which in Ishana Prabhu's mind creates a confusion that devotees don't understand what the standards are, and that leads to their being misled. So his question is, why is it so? Is it because of our impurity that we're afraid to call out improper things publicly?
Interesting question. We should be afraid of having to point out faults, but then again, we may have that as a responsibility. I remember an example of Srila Bhaktivedanta Saraswati Thakur correcting a devotee who was unnecessarily correcting others. It wasn't his service. And so Srila Bhaktivedanta Saraswati Thakur said, it's such an austerity to have to correct others. I don't understand why you are so eager to take up this austerity unnecessarily. This is brilliant. parent has to correct the child. The spiritual master has to correct the disciple. If you're in a leading role, you have to point out when things aren't done properly, but you're always praying to Krishna, how can I do this in the best way? You don't want your false ego getting mixed up in your corrective measures. And that takes a lot of effort. And you're always thinking about it later. Did I really say things in the best way? Could I have done better? What to do? Should I say something? Should I not? I can tell you, those doing the service of initiating devotees, they often have to face the fact that they can't instruct a particular disciple because the disciple's not willing to hear. And so therefore you just involuntarily have to keep your mouth shut, which means the disciple doesn't get corrected. But what can be done if the disciple shows no willingness to hear? So the guru's hands are tied. So yes, you pointed out a real problem, and it's a problem that can only be overcome by sincerity on all sides.
Thank you so much, Maharaj. Another question is from Mataji Krishna Priya, who is a senior counselor in Russian Yatra, and she is also a Shiksha Guru for some disciples of Bhaktivedanta Maharaj on his request. So she's asking, when does a devotee attain or obtain qualification to listen deeper about Krishna Lila? That's the verbatim translation of her question.
What does Her Grace mean by deeper?
Вопрос Матаджи Кришна Прия только что перевел, и Махарадж в ответ спрашивает, а что вы имеете в виду под углубленным слушанием о Кришна Лиле? Можете ответить голосом.
Это вопрос, который возник из ситуации с клубом Гопи Бавы. То есть преданные сосредоточились на этих лилах, и Шрила Прабхупада осудил это, но на определенном этапе преданному хочется погружаться в эти лилы. И вот как определить эту границу?
Your question was prompted by the story about the Gopi Baba club, because those devotees wanted to go deeper, as they thought, in listening to particular lilas, and Srila Prabhupada told them not to. But at a certain point of one's development, a devotee develops a desire to absorb himself or herself deeper in hearing about particular lilas, and she is asking about the borderline when it's legitimate.
Prabhupada's point was that they were not ready for that kind of medicine. And yes, it's true that in the 10th canto, there's a famous verse that by hearing of Krishna's pastimes, gopis, you can cleanse your heart of material contamination, but you have to be ready for that medicine. Just like in Ayurveda, there are some medicines that are highly effective, but they're very strong. And so first you have to take preliminary medicines to prepare your body so that it can handle the very strong medicine. So Prabhupada's point to these persons were that they weren't ready. And also, why are they just focusing exclusively on those sections about Gopi Baba, and even saying that the other leelas are inferior and lower? Even Vatsalya Prem, the Vatsalya Prem of Mother Yashoda. Oh, this really set Prabhupada off. So, yes, the information is there in his books, And so Prabhupada's point was take everything in his books, not simply the end chapters of Ancha Leela, but also where in Adi Leela, Lord Caitanya says, my guru told me I'm a fool and chastised me. So take everything. And then honestly, your natural inclination will arise. But if you prematurely jump to one Leela and say, that's me, you could run into huge problems. So therefore, we have a spiritual master, we have senior Vaishnavas, and we have, of course, the founder, Acharya Srila Prabhupada. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Maharaj. I don't know how long you're willing or able to go on with questions. We have 4 questions left. It is getting quite late for you. Is it okay to ask those 4 questions
Not
briefly?
quite late. Not quite late, but it's hard for me to break away from the association of such wonderful devotees.
Okay. I'll read the questions in the chat. Another question is from Goparaj Prabhu. He's asking if it's correct to understand that everyone should obtain his or her individual mission that is in accordance with their gurus or their local leaders. And is it correct to understand that one's individual sadhana without attempting to or trying to help the parampara is acceptable only for the very basic level of devotional service? Appropriate, should I say.
I understood the first half.
The second half is that if one can just practice individual sadhana without trying to help the parampara, that's appropriate only for the very beginning.
Trying to what? Without what?
Appropriate only without trying to help the parampara is appropriate. I'm reading verbatim the question. Is appropriate only for the very beginning stages of one's devotional service. In other words, if one doesn't help the parampara, then he's a neophyte or she is a neophyte.
How can there be devotional service without trying to please the devotee? As Bhaktivedanta Thakur writes in one song, Krishna se tomar, Krishna dite par. Krishna, you're the property of your devotee. So therefore, I'm running after the devotee shouting Krishna, Krishna. He doesn't say I'm running after Krishna directly. And Narottam Das Thakur says, Chodiya Vaishnava Seva, Nishta Payeche Keba. Who do you know who's ever gotten free from the illusory energy without having served a Vaishnava? So the sooner that we render devotional service for pleasing the devotee, the sooner Krishna takes our service seriously.
Thank you, Maharaj. The next question is from Varshana Prabhu. He, first of all, thanks you very much for this important, very meaningful lecture and the message that you gave in it. And his question is about problems in relationships between devotees. He agrees that we don't live in the worlds of, in the cities of this material world. We live in the Vrindavan, but when we have quarrels and conflicts between devotees, how should we properly deal with them so we don't get transformed back from Vrindavan to Moscow and some other materialistic city? In other words, his question is how not to lose this opportunity to live in Vrindavan, and how should we properly relate to conflicts between devotees?
Yes, conflicts between devotees happen for young devotees as well as for senior Vaishnavas. We are individuals and eternally will be so. And as Prabhupada pointed out, even in Goloka Vrindavan, there are conflicts, but it's all 100% for Krishna's pleasure. Our conflicts, though, need to be resolved, and sometimes it takes time. But we should be committed to the process of resolving the conflicts. It may not happen overnight, but if we're always praying in the core of our being, in the core of our heart, Krishna, how can I satisfy this devotee I'm in conflict with? How can I see things from his or her point of view? Even if I am quite sure I'm right, I must be wrong because of going about being right in the wrong way. So again, to quote Srila Bhaktivedanta Saraswati Thakur, he said, the only reason why I see a fault in you is because I have that fault in me 1,000 times more. Therefore, I'm the world's expert in the fault. That's why I can see it in you in a tiny degree. So yes, there are conflicts due to social interaction. ISKCON is full of so many different types of personalities, backgrounds, nationalities, this, that, the other. And like an old Bengali proverb says, when you have a bunch of clay pots together on an ox cart and the ox cart's moving, the clay pots are going to bump against each other and make some noise. It's just a fact of life. So we need to learn how to handle conflict. And that means don't be so quick to pull out your gun and fire it. Just keep your gun packed in its holster and watch your tongue. It's amazing the things we can say that just make our conflicts much worse, just because we can't control our tongue. You, whether in family life or in temple life or on whatever level of management, GBC level, regional level, whatever, we have to learn how to watch our tongue, control it. And that really helps, because when you don't say things that could make the conflict worse, then it's easier to resolve the conflict. But words spoken that shouldn't have been spoken just stay in the atmosphere, stay in someone's consciousness, and even you may apologize, but still they can't get it out of their mind that you said this, you said that. Dealing with devotees, and this will be my last point before retiring, dealing with devotees requires divine empowerment. It's not a matter of mundane social skills. We need to beg Krishna, please give me the ability to properly associate with your devotees. Get in the habit, and this is something I try to do. Before dealing with a devotee, just pray to Krishna, how can I, if it's a peer or a senior devotee, how can I take most advantage of this devotee's association? How can I truly benefit? How can I act in such a way that I can get maximum benefit from this sadhu's association? And if it's a younger devotee, what can I say? What can I do that will really motivate this devotee to go to a higher platform in bhakti? So there always has to be this prayerful mood in the heart. Not that, oh, I know how to talk. I know how to wheel and deal. I know how to negotiate. I know how to hammer out agreements. I've got all these skills. Those skills can be used in Krishna's service, but without the backing of Krishna's internal potency, the solutions, the so-called solutions, don't work, or they just seem to work and don't last. So, in conclusion, associating with devotees is a skill that requires divine empowerment, not mundane social skills. You have to beg Krishna for the ability to associate with devotees. All right.
Thank you very much, Maharaj. There's one last point from Pavana Prabhu. He wanted to ask your blessings to develop attachment to Lord Caitanya and to Navadvip Dham. He says he needs it because somehow he fails to develop it properly. I guess we can all join him in this request, Maharaj, and please bless us all for developing this attachment to the mission
Please
of Sri
bless
Caitanya,
me.
Mahaprabhu, and
Please,
Srila
I'll take it
Prabhupada.
all from you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Maharaj. Thank you very much, Bhaktivedanta Maharaj, for joining this session and for inviting Divamrita Maharaj.
I'm indebted to you all. Vancha kalpatubhyascha kripa sindhu bhyevacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Prabhupada ki jai.
His Holiness Divamrita Maharaj ki jai.
Thank you, Maharaj. Thank you very much.